they tell us that we have, I don't know, I don't ever look at that stuff, but they tell us that we have quite a few people still following us on live stream, and we're glad to have you guys with us, whoever you may be. We miss you. If you're members of Northview Missionary Baptist Church and you're watching us via live stream, we miss you. We hope that when you feel comfortable, you come back, and we'll welcome you with open arms. If you feel comfortable this way, we welcome you this way. We have visitors who are watching us, so which should tell me to act better. But we have quite a few people outside of our church watching us as well. And well, the good thing about that is some of those people who are watching us know that you guys are a praying class. I mean, we get prayer requests from all kinds of people that I personally don't know them. And that's fine. As long as they know what we do with their requests, or what you do with their requests. We'll start off with requests this morning. Do you guys have any requests you'd like to lift up?
Tim Eklund mentioned a friend in practice, a nurse friend of hers' husband has been in the hospital with COVID. This is his 9th week on the ventilator, and the prognosis is not good. And she has prayer, and she told me the name. I can't remember.
Okay.
Beverly, Randy's his name.
Randy, yes.
Beverly is.
Hard to forget.
That's right. See?
Okay, Randy, and y'all know that I try to say this again through the mic so people at home can hear. Randy, a co-worker's husband of Kim Ackland's, still on the ventilator. COVID. Doesn't look well. Doesn't look good. So let's lift up Randy and his wife.
And Julie, I think she put this on the group meet, the baby
Yes.
that has a mass on its bladder.
Mm-hmm.
She said this morning that they tested and it is contained right there. So
Praise the Lord.
we need to remember that family.
Remember the family, yes, for sure. Thank you, Debbie. That was. Well, I'm gonna tell you something. It's one thing when the health problems come to our age or older. Brother Neil, Sister Carolyn, I'm sorry. You joined that group with us today too. But it's different when it affects them babies, isn't it? My goodness. Your heart just breaks when you hear that news about these babies. They're so innocent. Okay, thank you, Debbie, for those. Who else do we have to mention? Brother Mike, continue to remember him. October the 11th for Brother Mike. We're praying that stays firm. And I know he wants that to stay a firm date too. Mark Daniel is going to have his surgery on the 22nd. Y'all pray for that date. You pray for his surgery. He's going to have some repairs done to his heart, and he's ready to get that done as well. Remember Sandra, as she, bless her heart, deals with Mark. And he knows I'm going to say that. Okay. What else we have? Tanya? Okay. Bill having... Okay. Bill Whitlock and Beverly as well. Bobby Franklin, remember her. Betty Kingston is out of the hospital. Keep remembering Sister Betty. I know that Sister Betty has joined another church, but that doesn't keep us from lifting our prayers up for this sweet lady. Okay, Cindy Rector, keep her in your prayers. The Rakes, the VCs. Dennis, you got another one?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that Larry had another scan done, and I think it's Thursday. Waiting on the results.
Okay. Larry Whitlock, I know we mentioned it Wednesday night in our class. They had found another spot on Larry, and he has had a scan, and we're waiting on those results. I myself am waiting on some results. Should be here by Wednesday. Went in Friday. Y'all pray for me. And I had another scope done. I'm on the 2-year program now because they did a biopsy 2 years ago, and now they did another biopsy Friday. So y'all keep me in your prayers as well, please. Who else do we have? Unspoken requests. Anyone else? Okay. I didn't bring my phone in this morning to kind of scan through our GroupMe app to look for other prayer requests. But as I say every week, isn't it a blessing to know that God knows who they are? And more importantly, what else does God know? He knows the outcome long before we do. Long before we do. We get hung up on prayers sometimes. We pray them, this is what I want. Right? This is what I want. And you know what? He told us to do that. He told us to come to Him and pass our request on to Him. Just don't get hung up thinking that you got the answer. He's got the answer. Okay? Baby's doing great.
She is.
Oh my goodness, did you see Angel?
I could see
Oh,
her. I didn't even see her.
no, it was palpable. She, just the sound of her voice. Isn't that the truth, though? Isn't that great? I told some of you may not have been. I said earlier, I call Ricky every year on his birthday, and it hurts me every year to call Ricky on his birthday because that means that Ricky's a year older and I'm a year older. It hurts, man. The only thing that hurts worse now is to see Ricky showing pictures of his grandbaby. That'll date a guy right there.
Well, and he was in my senior high Sunday school.
I know. I know. He was in Galileans with me. Right, Dennis?
Him and another cross-section, we should have never done that.
That's exactly right. Dennis and I had no business going ourselves. We did. We loaded them up on that old church van, or church bus with no air conditioner, and we took them to camp one year. And I think I was 18. And what's even worse is their parents actually filled out a permission slip for them to go with them. What's wrong with Danny and Linda?
Well, now you might should have checked their signature.
It's possible. And I remember that, Dennis. We had a great time. We had the Lord blessed, and He blessed me and He blessed Dennis because we're still talking about it. And I remember the first thing I remember, Dennis, is if your cabin was the cleanest, you got to go eat first. After the first day when we ate last, that ain't happening again. We had the most clean, spotless cabin the next morning for inspection, and the Lynchview boys went first. First time it had ever happened in the history of Lynchview Missionary Baptist Church. We had a great time. They had Dennis and I refereeing the basketball games, and it was ugly. But
I wish I could just tell y'all how Randy can referee. To illustrate what you can't do. As long as you listen to one referee, you can't throw him.
I was throwing kids everywhere. All right, let's get the wheels back on. Let's get back on track here. All right, any other prayer requests, announcements? Sister Ann, you got any updates on the backpack ministry? Any needs? Good. 18, all right, 18 backpacks. That's great. Dennis and I and Clay and Jason, help me, Dennis, if I forget someone, took our old basketball goal over to the school. I did all the work. And, or at least I look like I did all the work. They were very appreciative of your church. Many thanks to this church for that donation. They got some kids that'll get a lot of good use out of that. Because we hope that things keep rolling along, and won't be long we'll be installing another goal in our new building. But thank you, church, for all you do for that school, and I hope we can increase that to other schools as well.
Randy, today's the last day for moms if anyone wants to buy a mom, and I'm collecting all the money.
Lindsay,
All the money.
you getting all the money? Okay, you thinking about turning it in?
Yeah, I'm
Okay. Last day for moms is today. See, Lindsay, or any other youth committee member?
I'm the money man.
She's the money lady. Okay. Lindsay said she got to turn her money in for the moms to her on your order. Okay? Been a good fundraiser.
Randy, one more quick thing. I'm sorry, but across our parking lot here. And Billy and I try to put things in there every now and then. And I've noticed since school started, it's empty most of the time. Maybe just one or two items.
Okay.
So if anybody, would want to put something in
Yeah.
there, just to.
Good point.
Where is it? It's right across our back parking lot in front of the school. Oh.
It's on the school. It's on the school property, and it does help some people. We hope that it goes to the right places and right people get it. But if you have some extra you want to put in that food box in front of the school over here behind our church, please do so. A lot of kids go hungry, folks, that we don't even think about. Okay. Thank you, Debbie. Anything else? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. How about that? Let's get started right. Rick, would you mind opening us in prayer, please? Yes. Yes. Amen. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles, if you want to Exodus chapter 7, please. Exodus chapter 7. Last week we had left Moses and Aaron speaking to Pharaoh and making demands of Pharaoh that God laid on their heart to make to Pharaoh, saying, "Let my people go," right? How many of y'all remember 1981? Some of you were what? How old were you in 81? Or were you?
-4.
-4? I'm sorry. I kind of put myself out there with her age this morning, didn't I?
Yeah, that was like.
Okay. -4? Wow. Okay, who else? Angel, how old were you in 81?
7.
7 years old. Becky, I know how old you were. Carol, I know how old you were. Okay, that hurts too. Okay, we're going to go back to 1981 just a second. Okay, in March of 1981, Ronald Reagan was leaving a hotel after a breakfast meeting. Press was out front, and a guy named Hinckley shot him. An attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. They rushed him to the hospital. Mr. Brady was injured badly, and now we have the Brady Law because of that. Taken to the hospital, utter chaos in the White House because the Vice President, George H. Bush, was out of town. They took Ronald Reagan directly into surgery to find this bullet after they figured out that he had indeed been shot. Chaos, pandemonium was breaking out in the country because there was nobody saying anything on the news about what's going on. Nobody was reporting to us what was going to happen next. And you got to remember, this is in the day when the phones weren't giving us every second of every information. Some of Reagan's cabinet was down in the Situation Room. Some of his cabinet was scrambling because they thought that the press needed to be notified and given an update. And I'll never forget this. The Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, walked to the podium, and people were firing questions at him, and the first thing he said is, in response to a question about who's in charge, Alexander Haig says, "Well, I'm in charge here." That sent shock waves everywhere too, because no, he wasn't. Nobody knew who was in charge. We hadn't heard from our vice president. We'd heard from this lunatic Haig, who said he was in charge. Finally, someone with a clear head reminded our leaders of the 25th Amendment, which was adopted when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, that the power, if the president and the vice president are not available to be in power, it goes to the president pro temp of the Senate. The question was, who's in charge? Who's in charge? Now, guys, I'm not going to get all political on you this morning, but I will say this. There have been times in the past few months that we've wondered who's in charge, right? I can't go there this morning, Lindsay. But people sitting in this room with me, all of you sitting in this room with me, I'm looking around the crowd here and I'm pretty confident in what I see. We know who's in charge. Now, we say it very freely. We know God's on His throne. And then we watch the news and we get worried, right? God, Rick says no. I agree with you, Rick. I have to talk myself down off the ledge occasionally, Rick, and say, yes, God is in control. We know who's in charge. At the time in Moses' life right here, there was one guy who thought he was in charge. He was in control. Now, the name of our lesson is the power of God, and I changed it to who's in charge. Because this fellow named Pharaoh is about to find out who is in charge. And it ain't him. All right, in your Bibles, let's go to our first reading here in Exodus chapter 7. We'll read verses 1 through 6. And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and thou Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand on Egypt, and bring forth mine armies and my people and the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know, listen to this, folks, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt, and bring out the children of Israel among them. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. Just a couple of things I want to start with here on these first 6 verses that we read. God is commanding Moses to do this and say this. If you'll remember, Moses was not a confident speaker. Whatever the issues were, you know, I don't remember seeing anything in the Bible that described to us what his problem may have been with speaking. But he also had appointed Aaron, his brother, as prophet, as he says in his holy word here, to go to Pharaoh and say these things. That key verse in our lesson this week, even on the other column on the first page of our books, the key verse here, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. That key verse says so much that we don't even get yet. And I don't think fully the men who were delivering this message to Pharaoh completely understand what this verse was saying. Pharaoh thought he was in charge, and not only that, Pharaoh thought that his false gods were also in charge. And I'm telling you guys, I mentioned it a week or two back, Egypt had a god for everything. I mean, everything. They were all over town. They were all over the buildings. They were in your face constantly. All these gods, and everywhere you walked, you had to stop and pay reverence to each one of these gods. Not only did they think Pharaoh was in charge, they thought their gods were in charge. Now, that first verse says that God told Moses that I have made you a god unto Pharaoh. Why do you think he phrased it that way? Because they had so many gods, God is thinking that if I make you a god unto Pharaoh, he's going to pay more attention to you. God with a little g. Not the God, but a God. And he sends these men to tell him these things. Now let's slip on down to verse 3. Let's go back to verse 4, 5, and 6 again. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt. But once again, there's some words in there that nobody really can comprehend. When it says that God says that he's going to lay his hand upon Egypt, now we all know what that means in present day. But I don't know that we have always seen the full extent of the power of God. We've seen God move and we've seen God with some power, don't misunderstand me. But we have yet to see the full extent of God's power. We can't handle it. Pharaoh certainly can't handle it. The Egyptians can't handle it. Even the children of Israel at that time, like us, aren't prepared to handle the full extent. Last week's verse said the strong arm of God. You watch these news, Carol almost said newsreels. Boy, that dates me too. You watch these news stories of these tsunamis and things that go on in other countries and earthquakes and wildfires in California, and you see all these natural disasters that are going on. We experienced some flooding here a few years ago that was just catastrophic, we thought. As bad as all that is not the full power of our God. He's in charge. He sends just enough, and he can start it and stop it whenever he's ready. We've never experienced the full power of God in our church. Would you agree with that? I'm going to go back some years. When I came under conviction as a 10-year-old in a little country church in Quitman, Arkansas, I felt like I had experienced the full power of God. In that hot, non-air conditioned, Dennis, red wasps were popping on the ceiling. I never will forget that. Red wasps were popping on the ceiling everywhere. They were just flying around. Nobody paid any attention to that except me. But what I also paid attention to was the powerful message that man stood in the pulpit and delivered about sin and sin in my own 10-year-old life. And at that moment, I experienced the power of God. Not the full, I still can't say that it was the full, it was powerful enough for me though. Just enough to start with me and stop with me. Just like these natural disasters that I've been talking about. God shows His power in all kinds of different ways. He shows it in births of grandbabies, our kids, our oldest granddaughter turning 16, the life she's lived to this point. That's powerful. He shows it in healing, doesn't He? He shows it in spiritual ways in our life to get our attention, to focus us on Him and Him alone. And those times of power are for us personally. This power that He's getting ready to display here is for a whole country. Not just Egypt, but for Israel too. He's going to get their attention, guys. Now, there's been things that got our attention before too, right? We can go back to 9/11. We can go to so many other things that have happened in our lifetimes that got our attention. And we knew that we needed to get close with God at that moment. but it soon fades. When God unleashes His power here, it's the full power of God. If they didn't understand it, they're about to get a good taste of it. And we only get a taste of it by reading His Word. And what happens here? In verse 5 says, "And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." There is so many times in this world we live in today that I wish people would understand that He is Lord. I mean, it just every day I remind myself of whether it's a political situation, whether it's a war situation, whether it's as I said earlier, a wildfire in California, whatever the case may be, I want to shake people and say, this is the strong arm of God. Pay attention. This is who He is. He's in control. He's allowing this to happen. And He's going to stop it when He's getting ready to stop it. Moses and Aaron have been charged to go tell this Pharaoh these things. Now, what do you think Pharaoh's reception to this is going to be? This man who thinks he is a god, he really believes that he is a god. And his people have made him into a god. He's got a god on every street corner of all kinds. So gods are all around him. And these two lowly men are about to go into him and say, Aaron is about to tell him that the God tells you these things. What do you think his reaction to that's going to be? God already knows what his reaction is going to be, doesn't he? He already knows. "And the Egyptians shall know that I am the God when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt and bring out the children of Israel." And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded. So they go to him and they tell him these things. And we all know from our younger classes and some of us who were brought up in church, we've heard the stories of the 10 plagues, right? I've seen Debbie and Becky teach this story about every 3 years. Right, Debbie? About every 3 years to kids, Beth. And now they're teaching them to your kids, Beth. A lot of us can say that same thing in here. But we can't understand the true nature and the true power of God. He tries to tell us in His Word, but we don't understand it. How awful and how powerful this was. These gods that were set up all over town, listen to these names. If I can pronounce half of them, I'll be lucky. Hapi, spirit of the Nile. Hekti, form of a frog. Hapi, spirit of the Nile. I said that already. Utachit, that's just Rose City way of saying it. A god who manifested himself as a fly. Some of these names ringing a bell with the plagues. Apis, a bull. There was a picture of a bull, sacred bulls and cows. Sekhmet, goddess of the power to heal. Sepphoris, healing god. Seth, protector of crops. Nut, what a name. Nut, sky goddess. Isis, goddess of life. Seth, protector of crops. Re was the sun god. Atum, god of setting sun. They even had a god for the sun and a god for the setting sun. Osiris, the giver of life, and of course Pharaoh, who was considered a deity himself. All these gods, that's where their power was. The Egyptians their power was solely focused and invested in these false gods to protect them from everything that could ever possibly happen to them. They thought those gods were in charge. Moses and Aaron is about to tell them that you, Pharaoh, and your gods are not in charge. I'm about to explain to you, Pharaoh, our God, who is in charge. And if you don't believe it, you're going to get to experience the power of our God. Let's go on with our reading. Chapter 7 again, verse 17. Thus saith the Lord, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is mine, in mine hand, upon the waters which in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. Obviously, at this time in our scripture, they have gone to Pharaoh and told them once again that our God says for you to let his people go. And Pharaoh laughed in their face. You little men have come to me with your stories of your God. You're talking to a God. I am God here, and I control all these other gods that are here. And you're telling me to let God's people go? Now, Delbert and Miss Betty, they run a great business. That would be like me going into these two people and telling them how to run their business. I know what Delbert would say, and I for sure know what Miss Betty would say. We laugh at that, but this is the stage I'm trying to set for you here, is these two guys, Moses and Aaron, go into the greatest human being in the world at that time. And he knows it once more. And he says, no, I'm not letting these people go. Challenge accepted. And God tells Moses and Aaron to go out to the Nile River, the life-giving water of the country at that time. Flows for miles and miles and miles. Stretch forth your rod, and he turned that water into blood. That's the first one. How many of y'all saw 10 Commandments on Easter? Every Easter?
Every Easter.
And in their poor way, they try to depict that in the footage in that film. It's not up to date, but it proves a point. One of the things that they say in that movie that is scriptural, there's some, but not all, is when that water turned to blood, first they couldn't believe what was happening. And one of the high officials for Pharaoh in that film says, what later on tells them, well, we heard of a volcano that erupted miles away that spewed red ash. And that's what turned the water into blood. Folks, I'm here to tell you, that's as false as it can be. When my God, who is in charge, says he turned the water into blood, it was blood. It wasn't ash. It wasn't colored water. It was sure enough blood. All these plagues that we read about, one right after the other, they go back to Pharaoh each time, right? Is this not enough, Pharaoh, that you see how powerful our God is? He just turned all of your water key to life, right? Water is key to everyday life. Let alone the washing, the drinking, the care, the water that's given to the livestock. Everything was affected because of this one plague. Disease started because of this flood, this water. People had nothing to drink, Becky. And it still wasn't enough to prove to Pharaoh who's in charge. You see what he's doing to his own people? Because of his pride and his ego. Now we say shame on Pharaoh for that. God has moved in our lives many, many times, folks, and proven to us that he is in charge and proven to us that he is in control. And sometimes we don't accept that. And sometimes even if we do accept it, 3 or 4 days we forgot it. We go right back to our lives after the major catastrophe is over in our life. We go right back to where we were. In some ways, we can be a lot like Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 7, verses 16 and 21. 6, 16 and 21. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Verse 21. Else if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies unto thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground wherein they are. Each one gets worse and worse if it's possible. First, he affects the flood, the water, and then it's the swarms of flies and and lice. Anybody ever had any experience with lice? I know it's hard to admit. Y'all ever sent your kid home and got some, what is that stuff everybody washes their kids' hair in? Rid, huh? Rid. Man, if anybody ever, I'm going to tell you something about Debbie Peck. If there was any report of lice in any school in Little Rock, maybe even Arkansas, because her kids would tell you, Mama got some rid last night, we had to wash her hair in it. But it was a precaution she was taking. Lice are awful, folks. And if you think lice are bad, yes, ma'am.
When we were at the children's home,
Yes.
we received a girl in that had lice.
Mm.
Oh, it was.
Now, we're talking about here, Miss
And everybody else started saying my head itching.
Miss Carolyn, we're talking about here that God took the dust of the land.
Oh, my.
The very dirt, all the granules of sand, and each one of those turned into these insects. At one time, flies. He said flies would infest their homes, his people, their homes, and their lives. All right, here we go. Years ago when we were having play practice down at the church, Becky came in and I was up on stage and she was at the back of the church telling me to come talk to her. I went down there and I got within about this close, Brett, of Becky, and I said, "What is that smell?" She stunk. And she said, "That's why I'm here." And Becky is frantic at this moment. Mother's freezer has gone out, and I said, "Oh." That freezer had all the deer meat and fish in it, and quail and duck. Not that that makes it any worse. That in my eyes it was worse. So I left play practice, and I went over there, and I walked into Miss Holt's backyard, and I could smell it already. And then I opened the door to the storage room. The flies were unbelievable. And it was just, they were hitting you in the face. You couldn't open your mouth for fear of them flying in your mouth. They were just that bad. Now you multiply that in a 10 by 12 storage room with those flies and those lice being on you or affecting you every second of every day. Delbert, I can't stand to get a tick or a chigger on me. I get a chigger on me, I'm done for the day. I'm going home. I don't care how good the hunting is. I'm going home and I'm taking care of the chiggers. Can't stand it, man. It's not like you said. You feel them everywhere. You didn't have to wonder about these insects. They were all over you. You could see them. And when you saw those insects, you know what else you were seeing? The power of God to make a difference in their world, to change their world, turn it upside down with insects. And these first three plagues, I want us to understand something very important here. The Egyptians were not the only ones that were affected by these first three plagues. A lot of people don't understand that. The children of Israel were affected by these first three plagues as well. And then we have to stop and go, now wait a minute, wonder what's going on there. And I should be getting to that soon if I have enough time. Matter of fact, I'll just read it for you. Exodus chapter 8, verse 20. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, and that they may serve me. Else, if wilt thou not let my people go, behold, I will send a swarm of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and excuse me, and into thy houses. And the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground wherein they are. Verse 22. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end of thou mayest knowest that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. He started sparing his own people during the swarms of the flies, to relieve them of those plagues. Why would God let his own people suffer from some of these plagues in the beginning? Why do you think? Are you God's people? Do you consider yourself to be one of God's people? Does he let you suffer? Why does he let you suffer? He wants to hear from us. What'd you say, Lindsay? Strengthen. And to also, sometimes God has to prove himself to us, doesn't he? Now, that's sad to say. It really is sad that we have to be proven that God is in power and control. But sometimes he knows he has to prove his power to even us.
And these people have been there over 400 years. So how many of them still worship as they did before?
If at all. And how many of them were thinking that these Egyptian gods may be the right path here? You think about that. They were surrounded by all these pagan gods day in and day out, and under their taskmasters who worshiped those gods. Some of that may have filtered into them too. God does the cleansing. God uses these first plagues to cleanse his own people, to strengthen his own people, and to get his own people to cry to him. Sounds familiar to me. It's exactly why he lets things into my life. Wake up, son. That's what he's telling me. Wake up, son. You're not who you think you are. You're not as smart as you think you are. You're not as strong as you think you are. You're not as intelligent as you think you are. I'm in control. And I'm going to Pharaoh to tell him to let you go, and I don't ever hear from you. I guarantee you when those plagues started hitting not just the Egyptian people, but they started hitting those people in Goshen, the children of Israel, they started crying out to their God, who they knew was in charge of all this. And if they didn't know it going in, it might have taken 3 plagues, but they got there. They got there. They understood. Any comments before we go on?
I think whenever it says here, God hardened his heart, I think that God really hardened his heart. In our day today, you may have people, so we let him go after Israel go after 2 plagues. Then you got Israel split. Why did you let him go with this next? He hardened his heart, so God is going ahead and do all good.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he could, man, please get rid of it. Everyone will get him out. Let him go. That is the truth.
That's the truth. Yeah, no kidding. I think it's significant that he didn't stop after the first plague. I think it's significant that it took 3 of these plagues to affect his own people. That's just how much he needed to work on them to get them where they needed to be. I wonder sometimes if these people, when they heard that, originally when they heard that Moses and Aaron were going to Pharaoh to talk to him about their freedom, they were all for it. But when they started having to cut their own straw, what'd they do? Mully grubbing. Man used it. They started complaining. And you know what? Everywhere we read in God's holy word about the children of Israel, what do they end up doing every time? Molly grubbing. Exactly. It took 3 for some reason. God only knows. That's what he used. That's what he had at his disposal, and that's what he wanted to do, and I'm good with it, as long as he doesn't bring it on me. Right? All these plagues are happening. We skip over in our text, in our Sunday school book, we skip over to chapter 9. Chapter 9. Verse 3, 9, and 22. Behold, the Lord is upon thy cattle, which is in the field, upon the horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, and on the oxen, and upon the sheep. There must be very little grievous murrain. There shall be very grievous murrain. What is murrain? I don't mean, Carol, like meringue on a pie. I know you did. I saw you giggling. Y'all know I watch too much TV. And usually it's history, when I can find some. But through the years, there have been numerous documentary after documentary after documentary trying to disprove the very words that we're reading right here. Scientists, these guys are brains. They're the best in their field. And they put together these programs, and they try to disprove that all these, they want to say that, okay, well, this was a volcano that erupted that changed the water into blood. And because it turned into blood, and because the ash turned that water red, it messed up the ecosystem in that area. And when it messed up the ecosystem, the fish died, which they did. Even the crocodiles in Egypt died. All these diseases came from that and spread onto land, and then it caused the gnats and the flies and the lice, and then it caused the murrain of cattle, which is, some people want to say, was early anthrax. Y'all familiar with that? Anthrax was, even in our country at one time, was very common, and it still pops up occasionally. But anthrax was a disease that literally took the lives of the cattle or anything like that that had a hoof. And it also affected people at times. And they're trying to point out in these documentaries that, well, this was all scientifically in order, ecologically in order. All these things followed after each other. And you know what I say to that? That may be true. That may very well be true because of the order of things that are happening. The water, the flies, the gnats, the lice, the murrain, anthrax, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it did. Who caused that? Exactly. What they forget is they're telling me all these things through the television about science. I know the scientist. You know the scientist. My God is the one who gave the scientists intelligence to learn these things so they can report it back to us. My God is the God who teaches the doctors and the nurses the right way to go to care for people. He's the one that gave them that knowledge. My God is the one who gave everybody the knowledge that they have right now to do wonderful things in this world, but it all started with God. And even if this can be all scientifically traced, God still started it. God saw it through. God allowed it to happen, and He saw it go through all those 10 plagues, even if it is scientifically true. And quite frankly, I'm glad it's scientifically true. That just gives me more. It gives me more power in what I'm saying here, that my God controls that. And your God controls that, because our God is in charge. Not the scientist, not Pharaoh, not me, thank goodness. God's in charge. I got to hurry. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thy hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb and of the land, even all that the hail hath left. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which they felt. So not only did He stretch forth His hand to cause the hail to come, which damaged crops, damaged people, He caused what to come after the hail? Locusts to come and devour everything else that was left. And then he says that he stretched forth his hand and caused darkness to come over the earth. And it was so dark you could feel it. Whoa. We turn off a light in here, we're still going to get some light through these windows. Dennis, I've been duck hunting before when it's so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That still wasn't as dark as it was here. So dark you could feel the darkness. In other words, to me, that is stifling. So dark that it's hard to breathe. So dark that you can't see anything else or even anyone else around you to where you're a little afraid of the darkness. You could feel it. Only our God that sits on the throne can provide that kind of darkness. But at the same time, isn't it glorious that the only thing that our God that sits on the throne can provide that kind of light too? The light. But when he gets ready for it to be dark, it's going to be showing up dark. All these things were happening to Egypt, Israel in the beginning. And then God pulled it away from Israel and just concentrated on the Egyptians for one thing and one thing only, to prove He is in charge. To prove that He is power and He is the only power. And just as quickly as these things started, He stopped them. That's power too. When we want to think about how much we know, how intelligent we are, and we want to think that we've got everything under control, we're under control, let's be reminded that we're not. Never have we been in control. Never has Satan been in control. He gets his digs in, but he's never in control. God is in control. God was in control from the beginning to the end of these plagues, and the last plague has not even come yet. But with each one of these plagues, they would go back to Pharaoh, and it was so devastating to him and his country, and his people were crying out to him, man, get rid of them. And each time they would go to him, and with this same approach, if God said, now will you let my people go, he would agree to it momentarily. And then he would change his mind each time. Back and forth. Let's don't get caught up in that in our own Christian life. Let's don't say one minute that God's in control and He's ruling my life, and then when something goes down, we change our mind and we think that He's not in control. We don't want these plagues in our life. And it can happen in different forms, right? And each time he would change his mind and say, no, they're not leaving. I've still got them. I am still in control. And in Exodus 10, verse 27, it says, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Dennis spoke to that a minute ago. Why did God harden Pharaoh's heart each time? Because he hasn't learned his lesson. He hasn't figured it out yet. And we'll see that even after the last plague, the death of the firstborn, he still didn't figure it out. And it cost him. We're out of time, right? Okay. We're going to consider ourselves dismissed. Let's get our hearts and minds right to go down this hallway, and let's worship the God who is in control, who does make these decisions, who causes these things to happen to us but brings us out the other side as well. He causes the darkness that we can feel, but He also provides the light. Okay? You guys are